very early in my career, I was assigned to a multi-year project, and at one point, I it kind of dawned on me that I actually didn't have a workspace at this facility. So I was there every single week for 3, 4 weeks at a time, and then I go home for a couple days. And I didn't have a desk, I didn't have a table. I I was wandering around the facility with a 5 gallon bucket that was flipped upside down, and that was my chair. And then wherever I walked to, they typically had a trash can that was sitting around, so I'd flip that over, and that's where my laptop sat. That was kind of my office. And the thing is that nobody really thought it was strange. Myself included. It's just kind of what we did at this facility. And it's funny because that's kind of stuck with me throughout my entire career. I mean, the buckets changed to ladders to actually having tables and chairs. That's when you know that you've really made it. But yeah, it started with just sitting on a bucket and using another trash can as a table. And that's so that's where the name of this podcast comes from the bucket, because a lot of my early career I spent on a bucket trying to make something work. It's just the way that I worked for many years. So there you have it, from the bucket. Welcome to From the Bucket, where controls design meets reality. I'm your host, Keely Smith. In this podcast, we explore industrial control systems as they exist in the field, not just how they were designed in CAD or how they look on paper, but how they operated in a production environment, how operators and maintenance interfaced with them, and the fun and interesting stories that I've made throughout the years of being a controls engineer. In this episode, let's talk about two of the big ones for controls engineering. That's travel and responsibility. So let's talk travel. So I'll be totally honest. I mean, the very first time that I traveled for work, it was crazy because, while I had traveled as a kid with my parents and whatnot, this was really one of the big times in my life where I got on a plane all by myself. I went to an airport. I got a rental car. I got a hotel room. Like it was kind of weird. Like all these things sound really simple and really like a standard skill set, but there's no real training for that in life, right? And not to say that there needs to be a training for it, but it's just something new. It's something that a lot of people haven't experienced before. And the interesting thing with the company that I started with was it was a lot of younger guys. So there was always at least one of us that we really hadn't traveled all that much. So my first travel destination for work was Dallas, Texas. Now, keeping in mind that I'm just a dude from the Midwest, so going out to Dallas, Texas was way, way, way different than I had ever experienced in my life up to this point. So, right off the bat, let me tell you two things that I absolutely loved about my time in Texas. One, the rental car agency that we used had amazing cars, like really, really fun cars for a 20-year-old to be renting and tooling around Dallas in. The second one is that I don't know that there's any place better in this country that knows how to do barbecue. I mean, the barbecue, I guess I can't even say just the barbecue, the steaks, the general beef in Texas is absolutely incredible. I still don't think that I've ever experienced anything quite as good as barbecue and beef that I got in Texas. I also think it's one of those kind of unwritten things, and it really didn't apply to me at this point in my career because I was still very, very young in my career. So I really didn't have much negative to say about being back in the shop, but there is something nice about being thousands of miles away from your shop, and the decision process for everything becomes a lot simpler because a lot of times when you back into your office, it's kind of like that rule by committee idea where you have your different departments that everybody's trying to solve the same problem, but you have a lot more people to it. When you're out there traveling, it's just you and the guys that you're with, and you guys got to make something happen. So it and like I said, I can't really say that this is what was going through my mind at that point, but the later I got in my career, the more I realized it's like, hey, actually, it's kind of nice being out in the field because you get away from all the office politics, and your whole job is to show up and do what you need to do to get a line running, get a machine running, get some system running. It kind of makes your life very, very simple. All this sounds really fun and exciting, but there are the negatives to it. I mean, the when you're away from home, you're working. I mean, there's nothing else really for you to do. So you're pretty much always on call. You're pretty much always available. If you're at your hotel room, you're answering calls. If you're watching TV, uh, and an operator calls you and says, "Hey, we've got an issue." Guess what? You're the one getting in the car to head over to the facility and get things back up and running. I have an absolutely incredible amount of love-hate relationship with my early travel in my career because, quite frankly, there's no possible way that I would be the engineer that I am today if it weren't for that early travel. But that early travel it just gets so difficult to deal with so early in your career. I remember so many days early in my career where we just worked. I mean, we we would be sent to a site for 20 plus days, and we would work 16, 18-hour days every single day because what else are you going to do? We've got a job that's got to get done. We've got way, 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 way too many things to work a short day and go back and sit around at the hotel. And so we just worked. And that's that was a whole experience in itself because I, anybody can say that they're a great worker. I can say that, oh yeah, I've never had issues working hard in my life, but it's different when you're working those long, long hours every single day. You're brand new. The mental exhaustion it's crazy. Uh, Besides the physical exhaustion, it just kind of it hits differently. That early career travel, and I remember my boss talking about it, and he was always pretty upfront with it that you know you were going to travel when you were a young engineer, and I think that at the time I kind of understood it, but it wasn't really until later in my career where I really truly understood like the experience, the opportunity, the exposure that I got from those many many years on the road. And it's again, it's a time that I would I'd never take it back. It's again, my career really took off from my time in the field because again, it's kind of like not having that safety net to fall back on. You again you're the person on site. You're the one that has to figure out how to do something, or you don't get to go home. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. Um, and being an early in your career engineer, people just automatically try to do the maximum amount they can. You want your company to look at you in that positive light. You want them to look at you as a person that they can count on, that they can rely on to get a job done. But again, you're drinking through the fire hose at this point, so you're just you're just burning the candle at both ends. You're really trying to do this. I remember one of the very first days that I was on site with this facility that I ended up spending a couple years at, and we had another senior engineer at this facility, and I remember wandering around the facility with him, and he was like, "All right, so I'm going to focus on this line," and it was a pretty big line, but it was one of the 11 lines that were going into this facility. So we're walking around, and he's like, "Yeah, and you know what? You'll take care of this project, and yeah, I guess you'll take care of this one too." And by the time we were done talking, he had pointed out 4 or 5 different lines that were now my responsibility to take care of. And that was a pretty crushing amount of responsibility to drop on a brand new engineer. But again, being that brand new engineer, I remember saying, yeah, you know what? Absolutely. I can handle this. I wanna be that guy. I wanna be that yes man. I can whatever I have to do, I can figure it out. That was also about the time that I realized that being a controls engineer was actually a pretty powerful position in terms of a project, because while we had project managers, we had mechanical engineers, we had mechanical install teams, we had electricians. In reality, a lot of those different groups ended up working directly with the controls engineer, because controls is last. Controls is the last piece to touch every single line, machine, whatever. We were always the last people. So everything up to that point where we can actually start doing our jobs, uh, it it mattered. So I remember being part of, you know, installing conveyors, because I couldn't really do anything until we had the conveyors installed. I remember wiring up motors and sensors because, well, I still couldn't really do anything until my everything was wired up. I remember just doing so many of these different aspects of the line, and really being a an integral part of that team, because uh, realistically it all came down to how I needed things to be so that I could program it correctly and I could make the lines work, which again is just such it's a mind-blowing amount of responsibility for somebody that just starts in this field. But it's the reality of it is that controls is kind of that driving force in a lot of projects, and it all just kind of snowballs together because you're starting to build these lines, and you know that you need to get to the next step. So you push yourself, you get more into it. You do more just so you can get to that next step. Then you start doing more with the next step, because again, you're trying to do is get to that point where you can actually do your part of the job. But when you're kind of in that mode, there's really nobody that's sitting there on the sidelines and saying, hey, we probably don't need to be going this hard, or, you don't need to dedicate every amount of your brain space to doing this project. There's nobody really saying like, hey, this probably isn't like the most sustainable way to keep to keep going and doing this. And I everybody talks about burnout, and I'll be totally honest with you. At this point in my career, I was way too excited for what I was doing. I never really felt burnt out. Um, for me, the it was kind of that emotional toil of, uh, I couldn't, my skill set was not where I needed it to really truly be that super successful. So I remember there were so many times where I'd be trying as hard as I possibly could, but things wouldn't work out because I was just that young dumb engineer trying to make things happen. So it was kind of it was an emotional toll for me to deal with all this travel, all this responsibility, because I felt that everything was kind of riding on my ability to do my job correctly. And here's the fun part: we're talking about all of these travel responsibilities and all of these things that were happening at the job site, and we haven't even touched on the fact that you know outside of working in Dallas, Texas, I was still a human being. I still had a life back home. I had friends. I had a fiance. Um, I still had things going on in my life, my personal life, that when you get just so deeply into your work and your projects like this, it's so impossibly hard to balance that the you get home. And I remember that whenever I get home, my fiance would want to go do stuff, and it's like I just physically and mentally can't. I'm exhausted because I was just putting so much into making things as good as I possibly could in my work life. So my whole work life balance was completely 100% skewed to my work life, and my personal life suffered from that. So it's again, this is that snowball effect, because we would work for that 3 4 weeks, we'd come home for a little bit, you'd be exhausted. Yeah, you really wouldn't get that personal time. Then you'd be back on site, and you're not at 100% anymore. And you just keep doing that over and over again, and you just get to a point where everything is like really really difficult, because again, you're still trying to learn this pretty crazy technical field that is controls. It's kind of funny to me looking back at this now because, as I say, I don't truly believe that I was experiencing burnout. I don't think that at the time I really had the language to describe kind of like what was going on in my life. Like, I wasn't thinking in terms of like what was sustainable for me, what the long-term cost of what I was doing. I just thought that what I was doing was being good at my job. I thought that, this is what I needed to do. If more needed to be done, I did more. If I needed to be more available for work, I was more available for work. If something if something broke, I was the guy to go out there to fix it, because again, that's where I thought that I needed to be. And I think probably the funniest part about that whole mindset is, you know, when you're so early in your career and you're dealing with such a big project, that success is it's really quiet. When things work, they just work. When uh, when there's no fires to put out, when there's no real problems happening, that is a time where you should celebrate your success. But uh, when I was in this mode, it's just like, all right, let's see, what's the next thing? Let's move on to the next line. Let's move over to the next system. Let's move over to the next phone call, because things just kept having to go on. Like, we had to continue things. Things didn't slow down. And you don't realize like how much of a mental load you start carrying. Like, it's not just that you're you're keeping track of hours anymore. You're keeping track of which lines had some weird little quirks to it, which sensors had some weird uh, readings coming back to them every now and then that you weren't quite sure about, which operators were running a line, and if this operator was running this line, okay, I got to pay attention to this line today because that operator has a tendency to do this thing. You never could kind of get away from it. Even I remember even when I was at home, my brain was still like thinking about what was going on at that facility. So like it never was really like I got time to relax. It's just I'm waiting for the next trip, I'm waiting for the next phone call, I'm waiting for the next thing to happen. And it's kind of a crazy way to live. One of the really subtle things that at the time I never really thought about it, but it truly changed the way that I lived because I just remember no matter where I went, I always had to have my laptop. It didn't matter if I was on vacation, it didn't matter anything that I was doing. I always needed to have my laptop available because I never knew when something was going to happen, when I was going to get that phone call. I mean, my phone was always on me. It was always, the ringer was always on because I never knew when something was going to happen. So, like, fundamentally, it changed the way that I operated. And, I was never fully just away from everything. Like, it was always just kind of there waiting for something to happen. Now, one of the big things that I do want to be really clear about is that, nobody was being necessarily malicious about anything. There was nobody really like sitting there uh, telling me that this is what I have to do. Nobody was trying to overload me or say, let's just keep dumping stuff on me to see how far they can go. It was more of a structural way that this company operated. You know, things needed to get done, and I was capable enough to do them, so they kind of landed on my lap. And I guess in a way, I was subtly training myself to always say yes, to always kind of be that person that could take the problems and come up with a solution with them. I was almost starting to create this idea around myself that my overall worth was based on how much I could do all by myself, and that's such a crazy thing, looking back at it now, because I didn't quite realize like that's a really dangerous way to look at things, because when you start tying your overall like feelings of self-worth to the work that you're doing, it's it's really hard to separate that work from your person anymore, because you've now created this situation where your worth is your work. And at the time it felt like growth, like, look, I can do more and more, like it's really cool. And this is where like I truly don't feel that I had that. I didn't feel burnt out, I wasn't angry, I didn't feel like I was trapped in this place, even though obviously I wasn't getting to come home as much as I would want to. But I felt really proud of what I was accomplishing. I was proud that, I could handle this. I was proud that people trusted me. And, you know, it just took me so long to see that, you know, there's other ways of operating where you don't have to work yourself to death in order to succeed in life. I'm going to go ahead and use a phrase that I've always kind of hated in throughout my entire career because it it's just kind of normalizing the way that young traveling engineers are treated. But this is kind of the time in my life where you know I was paying my dues, and this is what it looks like. This is how you get good at your job. This is how you earn the trust of the company. And you know I at that point in my career, it looked temporary. It was like, okay, I just need to get through this project. I never really thought about the fact that, the more you succeed in this traveling sort of role, the more that kind of begins to be your reality. And again, I will never say that I regret the experience. I don't regret the travel. I don't regret any of the lessons that I learned, or any of the time that I spent traveling. I just it's such a big part of who I am. It really set the tone for what my career has looked like. So again, I'll never say that I don't look back at this time with any amount of fondness. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things that were not great that I was doing to have this success, but I fully believe that. Again, I've said it a few times. This is kind of the beginning of where I became the engineer that I am today, and understood the work ethic that I needed to have, and understood that this is how you can succeed. Now, not to say it's the only way that you can succeed, and I definitely don't I don't work 16-hour days if I can avoid it now. But there are a lot of really positive things that came out of this time in my life where I was doing this crazy amount of travel with this crazy amount of responsibility. I know this episode is a little different from walking through a specific project or a technical problem, but part of why I want to make this podcast is exactly this. If somebody early in their career listens to this and realizes that other people have experienced the same things they're going through, that matters. Because when you're new in this field, a lot can feel really isolating. It can feel like you're the only one struggling with the travel, the pressures, the responsibilities, the expectations. Uh, but you're not. You're not the only one experiencing this. A lot of us went through some version of this. I think it's important for me to point out that, I don't want to tell this story because I think my experience was super unique. I like to tell this story because I don't actually think that it was. I think that this is, again, something that a lot of young engineers run into. And if sharing what it actually felt like for me, and what I did right, what I did wrong, and what I understand differently now, helps somebody feel like they're not crazy, that they're what they're going through is uh it's not trivial. These were really hard years for me in a lot of ways, but they truly helped shape me. They taught me a lot, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. But having the experience doesn't mean pretending it was easy or pretending it didn't have a cost. If you're earlier in your career and some of this sounds familiar, you're not broken, you're not behind, and you're definitely not the only one. This is From the Bucket, where controls design meets reality.